Ma'am, you need to sign here before we proceed. The surgeon didn't even look at my son when he said it. Eli was unconscious on the gurney between us, his small body trembling every few seconds while blood seeped through the bandages wrapped around his stomach. A monitor beside him screamed in sharp, uneven beeps. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. He was hit by a car, I said. The paramedic said he's bleeding internally. Dr. Victor Hale flipped through the chart with one hand. Calm, detached, like he was reviewing paperwork instead of deciding whether a 7-year-old lived or died. Insurance authorization, he asked. I just switched jobs. The coverage hasn't updated yet, but I can pay. Not tonight, you can't. The hallway went quiet. A younger doctor standing behind him shifted uncomfortably. One of the nurses looked down at the floor. I stepped closer. You said he needs surgery. He does. Then do it. Dr. Hale finally looked at me directly. This hospital doesn't perform high-risk emergency procedures without financial clearance. I stared at him, trying to process what I'd just heard. My son is dying. He shrugged once. That's not my problem. Behind me, I noticed security guards slowly moving toward the trauma bay entrance. They were expecting me to scream, break down, cause a scene. Instead, I went still. Eli let out a weak sound from the gurney, barely conscious now. His fingers twitched against the sheet. A junior doctor leaned toward Hale and whispered urgently, "Sir," his pressure's dropping fast. Hale ignored him. He slid a refusal form toward me. "If you cannot provide authorization, you'll need to arrange a transfer." A transfer? I looked around in disbelief. He won't survive a transfer. Nobody answered. My hands shook as I took the clipboard. Then I noticed the line asking for my son's full legal name. Slowly, I wrote it. Eli Morales. The pen stopped moving in Hale's hand. His eyes snapped down to the form. For the first time since we arrived, something cracked in his expression. Color drained from his face, so fast it looked physical. "Morales," he said quietly. I looked straight at him. "Go ahead," I said. "Refuse him." For one long second, nobody moved. Then a nurse burst through the doors holding Eli's monitor. "Doctor, he's crashing." The steady beeping collapsed into frantic alarms. Hale's jaw tightened. Suddenly, he spun toward the staff. "Prep operating room 3, he barked. "Now." The entire trauma team exploded into motion. Nurses shoved the gurney forward while doctors rushed beside Eli toward the operating wing. Hale followed close behind, but not before glancing back at me one more time. Not angry. Not annoyed. Terrified. The doors to operating room 3 slammed open as nurses rushed Eli inside. I tried to follow, but a surgical assistant caught my arm. "You can't go past this point. My son is in there alone. We'll come get you when we know something." The doors shut in my face. Through the narrow glass panel, I could see Dr. Hale standing over Eli's chart instead of scrubbing in immediately. He kept reading the last page over and over. Morales. Even from across the hallway, I could see the tension in his face now. A nurse hurried past me carrying blood units. Another whispered, "Why did he suddenly change his mind?" Nobody answered her. I sat down for exactly 3 seconds before jumping back to my feet again. My hands were stained red from holding Eli in the ambulance. I couldn't stop staring at the blood drying across my fingers. 3 years earlier, Daniel used to come home looking exactly like this, drained, exhausted, angry at the world. "Private hospitals are what people think," he'd told me once while sorting through stacks of notes at our kitchen table. "Some of these people decide who gets treatment based on money before they even look at the patient." At the time, I thought he was exaggerating. Then he died in a car crash 6 months later. The memory hit harder now because of something else he once said. "If anything ever happens to me," Daniel had warned quietly, "Stay away from Victor Hale." I never asked why. Back then, I thought he was just being paranoid from work. Now I watched the man himself, standing 20 feet away from my bleeding son. The operating room doors opened suddenly. Dr. Hale stepped into the hallway, pulling off one glove. His composure from the ER was gone. Up close, he looked pale. "Ms. Morales," he said, "I need to ask you something." "What?" His eyes searched mine carefully. Daniel Morales, was he Eli's father? My stomach tightened. "Yes." Hale looked away immediately, jaw flexing. For a moment, he seemed like he wanted to say something honest. Instead, he lowered his voice. "You should have taken your son somewhere else." I stared at him. What does that mean? But before I could press him further, a surgical nurse pushed through the doors. "We're ready, doctor." Hale stepped backward toward the operating room. "Just stay in the waiting area," he muttered. Then he disappeared inside again. I stood frozen in the hallway until someone beside me spoke softly. He ordered the security footage erased. I turned. An older nurse stood near the wall, pretending to organize paperwork. "What?" She kept her voice low. "The footage from the ER. Dr. Hale personally told administration to delete it." "Why would he do that?" The nurse glanced toward the operating room doors. Then back at me. "I think he's trying to protect himself from something." The surgical waiting room was packed when I walked in. Families sat under flickering television screens, clutching coffee cups and blankets, all pretending not to listen as two hospital administrators approached me with tight professional smiles. "Ms. Morales," the taller one said, "we'd like to clear up a misunderstanding before this situation escalates unnecessarily." He handed me a folder. Inside was a confidentiality agreement. I looked up slowly. "My son is in surgery." "Yes," the woman beside him replied quickly. "And Dr. Hale is doing everything possible to help him. We simply don't want emotional confusion creating legal complications." Emotional confusion. The man lowered his voice. The interaction in the ER may have sounded harsher than intended. Around us, several people in the waiting room began paying attention. I closed the folder. "Your surgeon told me my child could die because I didn't have payment authorization." The room went silent. One woman near the vending machines looked horrified. "Wait, he refused surgery." The administrators immediately tried to steer me toward a side office. "Ms. Morales, let's discuss this privately." "No." The tension shifted instantly. Now everyone was watching them. A younger nurse behind the front desk suddenly stopped typing. Another staff member avoided eye contact completely when Dr. Hale's name came up. Then an older nurse stood up from across the room. "This isn't the first time," she said. Every head turned toward her. One administrator snapped, "Linda, sit down." But she ignored him. "I've worked here 14 years, she continued. "I saw emergency patients transferred out because they couldn't pay. Dr. Hale called them financial liabilities." "You are violating hospital policy," the administrator warned. My pulse quickened. I pulled out my phone and started recording. The woman administrator noticed immediately. "You cannot film inside this facility." Then stopped talking. For the first time since arriving, they looked nervous. The older nurse took a breath. "A reporter investigated this years ago, Daniel Morales." The name hit me like a punch. "He was working on another story before he died," she added quietly. I stared at her. "Another story about Hale." Neither administrator answered. But the taller one muttered under his breath, "That story was buried years ago." Buried. Not disproven. Buried. He realized too late what he'd said. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed in my hand. Unknown number. I opened the message. "Your husband was right about Hale. Check Daniel's old storage unit." I left the hospital 20 minutes later with my heart pounding hard enough to make me sick. Every second away from Eli felt wrong. But the message wouldn't leave my head. Daniel's old storage unit sat on the edge of an industrial district across town. I hadn't been there since his funeral. Dust covered the metal door when I rolled it open. Inside were stacked banker boxes, old recording equipment, and folders marked with hospital names. I pulled one open. Patient death reports, insurance denial records, handwritten notes. And over again, one name appeared across the files. Victor Hale. My breathing slowed as the reality settled in. Daniel hadn't been chasing one bad story. He'd been building a case. I found audio recorders, labeled with dates and interviews from grieving families. They said there were no beds available. They transferred my husband after 8 hours. They told us surgery wasn't financially approved. One by one, the voices painted the same pattern. People delayed. People denied. People dead. Then I noticed something tucked inside one of Eli's old toy boxes Daniel had stored there years ago. A flash drive. Tape attached to it read, "If something happens to me." My hands trembled as I picked it up. Before I could plug it into my laptop, my phone rang again. "Ms. Morales," a sharp voice said, "this is hospital legal counsel. You need to return immediately." "Why?" "There are developments regarding your son's case." The line disconnected. By the time I got back to the hospital, news vans lined the street outside. Cameras pointed toward the entrance. A crowd had formed near the emergency doors, former patients, angry families, reporters shouting questions at hospital staff. Someone had leaked the story. As I stepped inside, I heard a reporter yelling. Did this hospital deny emergency surgery to a bleeding child over payment? Administrators rushed through the lobby in panic. One of them spotted me and immediately turned pale. I kept walking. Dr. Hale stood at the far end of the hallway outside the surgical wing surrounded by staff members. The second he saw me, his expression hardened. "You should not have involved the media," he said. I stopped directly in front of him. "You refused to save my son." His voice dropped lower. "Your husband wouldn't stop digging." The hallway fell silent. Hale realized too late what he'd admitted. "He thought exposing this place would fix things," Hale continued bitterly. "Do you understand what would have happened? Hundreds of employees could have lost their jobs. The hospital would have collapsed. So people died instead." His face tightened. "He was destroying everything." "No," I said. "He was documenting it." Before Hale could answer, 2 detectives entered the hallway carrying folders thick with documents. One stepped forward. "Dr. Victor Hale." Hale's shoulders stiffened. "We need to discuss obstruction of evidence and multiple allegations of negligent homicide." The entire corridor froze. Then suddenly, the operating room doors swung open behind him. I turned sharply as a surgeon stepped out beside Eli's bed. "Mom." Eli's voice was weak, barely louder than a whisper, but the second I heard it, my knees almost gave out. I rushed to his bedside as nurses rolled him down the recovery hallway. Tubes ran from his arms, and his face looked pale against the white hospital sheets, but he was awake. Alive. "You're okay," I said, grabbing his hand carefully. "You're okay." His eyelids fluttered. "Did I scare you?" A broken laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "Yeah," I whispered, "a little." The surgeon beside the bed explained that they'd stopped the internal bleeding in time, but Eli would need monitoring for several days. I thanked him without fully hearing the words. Everything around me blurred except my son breathing in front of me. Behind us, the hospital hallway had turned into chaos. Detectives moved room to room collecting records, while administrators argued in hushed panic near the elevators. Reporters crowded the lobby downstairs waiting for statements. And Dr. Victor Hale sat alone in a consultation room with 2 investigators. Over the next 48 hours, the full truth started coming apart piece by piece. Daniel had been investigating St. Catherine's Medical Center for years before his death. His first article exposed irregularities in private surgical billing, but according to the files from the storage unit, that was only the surface. The real system was worse. Emergency patients without strong insurance coverage were quietly delayed, transferred, or deprioritized in favor of wealthy patients, whose procedures generated more money for the hospital. Internal emails showed administrators discussing financial triage thresholds. Audio recordings from Daniel's interviews matched patient complaints that had disappeared from official records. Several deaths, labeled unavoidable complications, suddenly looked very different. And buried deep inside the flash drive was the piece that destroyed Victor Hale completely. An email chain. One message from Hale read: "The Morales reporter problem needs to be handled before he publishes again." Investigators couldn't prove Hale caused Daniel's car crash, but they could prove something else. He knew exactly who my family was the moment he saw Eli's name. That was why he froze in the ER. That was why he tried deleting the security footage. And that was why he initially refused surgery. Not just because we lacked payment approval, because panic had overtaken him. Operating on Daniel Morales's son meant reopening everything he thought had stayed buried. The story exploded nationwide within days. Former patients came forward publicly. Families demanded old cases be reopened. One woman recognized her husband's records inside Daniel's files and broke down during a televised interview. The older nurse who defended me in the waiting room became a key witness in the investigation. Hospital executives began suspending each other in desperate attempts to avoid blame. Victor Hale lost his surgical privileges first, then his medical license. Then the criminal charges arrived. Negligent homicide, obstruction of evidence, fraud investigations. The man who once controlled entire operating floors was suddenly being escorted through crowds of cameras, while reporters shouted questions he could no longer silence. Did patients die because of your decisions? Did you target uninsured families? Why did you refuse the Morales child? For the first time, he looked small. Weeks later, Eli finally came home. Neighbors brought food. Donations poured in from strangers across the country after the story aired. Every medical bill connected to Eli's surgery was erased by public fundraising within days. One afternoon, I took Eli to the cemetery. We stood quietly in front of Daniel's grave, while the wind moved through the trees above us. Eli looked up at me. Was Dad a hero? I thought about the storage unit, the recordings, the warnings he tried to leave behind. Then I looked back down at my son. He just refused to stay quiet when people were being hurt. A month later, St. Catherine's removed Victor Hale's name from the surgical wing. The brass letters came down one by one. And the surgeon who once looked at my bleeding son and said, "That's not my problem," lost everything trying to bury the truth.